I'm going to show you how I use this technique to create a believable sketch, how to get the windows in the correct place, and how to make sure that everything is following the same perspective.
Hey, here I am and welcome back. My name's Nathan, and if you're into urban sketching, watercolour, tips, tricks, all kinds of creative chaos, then you're in the right place. I also dabble with some other media now and then, and I take you along with me for the ride. But today I'm going to be answering this question from my Q&A video.
Can you make a video about perspective for dummies without including a string? Yes.
Now, I did a video last year about how you can use string to help you with your perspective, if you want to check out that video, but you don't always have a piece of string with you. In fact, I never have a piece of string with me. I only bought the string for the purpose of that video. So I'm going to show you my fingering technique. Stop it. I use my fingers to... I have a technique that I think I've developed. I've never seen anybody else doing it. Maybe other people do this. I don't know. I've never seen it. I call it my fingering technique. It's where I use my fingers to help. I use my fingers to help me with my perspective. And this is the example that we're going to use for today's video. So let's get into it.
Here we have my sketchbook. This is a Hannah Muller sketchbook. It's the one I'm currently working in. And here we have two sketches that I did when I was in the UK a couple of weeks ago. Now we're going to focus on the sketch on the left. This is the one that's got the perspective in it. And I'm going to show you how I create perspective when I don't have a ruler or anything like that. It's my fingering technique. And it's something like this. I use my fingers to map out where the perspective lines are going to be. I'm going to show you how I use this technique to create a believable sketch, how to get the windows in the correct place, and how to make sure that everything is following the same perspective. I'm going to start by going over some of the fundamentals of perspective. So if you're already good with this and you just want to see how I use my fingering technique, you can skip ahead to this part of the video. Now here we always start with the horizon line, which will always be at eye level. So everything above your eye or below your eye will follow perspective lines, and everything on your eye level will just be horizontal. First of all, you need to decide where your vanishing point is going to be. I've put mine over there on the left. And now I'm using a ruler, which is very unlike me because I don't really like super straight lines. But for the sake of explanation, I'm going to use one. Now that we have our two perspective lines heading towards the vanishing point, we can start adding some objects. So I'm going to start with just a square to get us going. And for the sake of explanation, I'm only using this 1 point perspective there. So everything that you draw within the space needs to follow these same lines. You see the horizontal lines there heading towards the vanishing point. This gives us this 3D effect and makes it look like these objects are living and existing in the same space. This goes for all kinds of objects. So here, for example, I'm drawing a tree, and you need to be sure that it follows the same lines. The top of the tree can go above the upper perspective lines because they're like organic shapes and they will all be different heights anyway. But the base of the tree would need to follow the same perspective lines to make it believable. Now, if we're going to add any people into scenes, it's always a good idea, for adults at least, to keep their heads on the horizon line, because normally people's heads are about eye level for us. Maybe if they were children, they would be a little bit smaller. But for people, if you're drawing a crowd, they all need to follow that horizon line. But then the feet would follow the perspective lines. Just added a little bust up there just to add a bit of context. Now, let's do a 2 point perspective. So here we have our horizon line and a vanishing point on the left. And two of our perspective lines. Now I'm going to add the front of the house first. Decide where that's going to be. You don't necessarily need to do it in this order, but it's just the way that I like to do it. Now we know that the side of the house isn't going to be directly horizontal like that. So we need to add another vanishing point over here on the right. Go from the top of the house down to the vanishing point, from the bottom of the house to the vanishing point, and then we can add in our third vertical line, and that gives us the basic cube or rectangular shape of a house. So now I'm going to show you how to do this using my fingering technique. As you can see, all of the lines here are following my fingers to this vanishing point there, where I just put my pencil, which is just slightly off the page. I tend to use vanishing points off the page. I think it looks more believable. We start with the horizon line just as before and decide where that's going to lie in the sketch. In this case, it's along the top of this hedge and wall. So I'm taking my fingers just slightly off the page and keeping the horizon line in, what do you call that, the nook of my fingers? I think you know what I mean, where your fingers join. That needs to be on the horizon line. I try to keep my fingers as wide as possible when creating the perspective lines. In case I need to find them again, I can just stretch my fingers and line them up. So here we're going to add another one on the right hand side, just off the page, because in my opinion, I think it looks more believable. Stretch fingers as wide as you can. Now you don't need to follow the outline of your fingers with the pencil because it will be wobbly. So I just make a general mark and then hold my pencil really far back and kind of swing the pencil back and forwards to give me these nice straight lines. Or straightish lines at least. Now I'm going to make a little mark just down at the bottom on the left perspective line to help me work out where the perspective line from the right will meet it. And I've just done that by eye. I've just eyeballed it. I haven't measured it. Now, if you want to find the middle of your building, provided that it is a square or rectangle building, you can just draw an X from corner to corner, and where those corners meet, that is the middle of that building. Then, if you draw another box next to it and do the same thing again, and draw a line between those 2 points, that will give you an extra perspective line. So you don't need to use your fingers all the time once you've created your 2 initial perspective lines. So I'm doing the same again here on the right, just so that I can find where the middle of the building will be on both sides. This is going to come in very useful for us later when we're working out where the windows and door and things like that are going to be. At this point, I do like to add some extra details around and about the subject, just to help me visualize how it's going to look in the end. So I'm just quickly sketching in this hedge and this gate post, I think it is, just so that I can get a visual idea of what it's going to look like. Now, using these X's, I can also work out the central vertical line, which I'm going to use to help me to work out where the roof will meet above the building. So I just extend that vertical line up a little bit to the desired height and then join the corners to that point. I find this extremely useful because it is so difficult to just eyeball this because of the angles and the perspective. It plays with your mind. So it's a very good way of working out how to do that. Then as the perspective line is going to be higher than the one I've previously used, I needed to use my fingers again for that. I'm going to continue adding X's into all of these boxes on the front of the house, all of these rectangles, and that's going to help me work out the thirds, which I need for these windows, because there are 3 windows and they're all equally spaced. So by making these X's and adding some more vertical lines, I will have a clear idea of where each of these windows is going to be. Now, as the windows don't actually rise up to exactly the middle of the house or come down to exactly the middle of the house, I'm just going to add a couple of extra lines of the perspective there so that I can see where not to go lower than and where not to go higher than. So I'm going to start by marking out the door. because that is in the center, and then I am going to use that as my reference for the rest of the windows. I drew myself an extra guideline there through the middle of the door. This way I can make sure that all the windows are equally spaced. So I drew from the bottom corner of the door through the guideline up until it met my reference line for the top of the window. And then I'm going to do that again on the other side so that the distance is believable. Just like that. So now that looks like a cohesive ground floor of the house. Now moving on to the upper windows, I can use my lower windows as a reference by drawing the vertical lines directly, and that way they are all going to stay the same size and they're all going to stay the same distance as the ground floor. Just make sure that all of the top and bottom lines of the windows are following the same direction and you'll have no problems. Once you've got a few of the perspective guidelines in place, you can make a very good guess at some of them. So here I'm not actually measuring with my fingers, or I haven't done any X's to follow through, but I'm holding my pencil far back so that I can draw a straight line going from the center point out towards the vanishing point. And I think that's worked well enough. Again, I'm going to reiterate that when I'm sketching, I don't necessarily need to go for realism. As long as it's believable, I'm happy with that. Because if it's hyper-realistic, you might as well have just taken a photo anyway. And, you know, let's leave some things open to imagination and interpretation. Here, adding in the chimney, I'm just going straight up. And I am going to need to use my fingers again because it is outside of my previous guidelines. And I did want it to look correct. So there I am, just making a larger line than I need, really. And here my fingers don't stretch far enough, so I'm using my pencil, putting my pencil right into the nook of my fingers there. And I can see that if I was to draw a direct line from the top corner of this window straight to the chimney, that should be correct. So again, look, holding the pencil far back so I can get some nice sweeping lines. And then I just fill it in just like that. And there you have a chimney that is cohesive and is in the same universe as the rest of the house. It's perfect. Now here is the fun part, using a fine liner to solidify your image. Now, when I started doing this, I realized that my windows are slightly leaning to the left. They're not really following the same lines as the rest of the house. That's due to my vertical lines not being directly vertical. But I can correct that with the pen. When I'm open sketching, I like to go over my lines twice. I think it adds a bit of interest, it reads as detail, and it adds a bit of quirkiness to the sketch. So here, when I have outlined these windows, I have corrected them slightly, and I don't think they look out of place at all. On these English cottages, everything's a little bit wonky anyway, so it works, it's fine. Now, when you're drawing in the windows, I'm drawing these ones as if they are set back into the house a little bit. So because of the perspective, you would only see the left-hand side and the upper side of the sill, or I don't know what you call it when a window is set back into the house, but I think you know what I mean. Whereas if they were protruding, you would have done the lines on the outside, on the right and the bottom. My personal preference when it comes to urban sketching is little windows like this, the tiny little frames. For me, if they are not all uniformed, it's fine. Like, they can be different shapes, they can be slightly different sizes, because in the end, the eye is going to read everything as a whole, and they will accept it as part of the image, and people won't even notice, most of the time anyway. And again, like I said, if you want realism, take a photo. This is interpretation. When it comes to the roof, if it's flat tiles like this one, I just draw straight lines. Well, straight. I allow them to wobble a little bit. I allow them to touch. It will add interest and it will read as detail. The only thing that I try to be sure of is that I am following the same lines, the same perspective lines. The same goes for adding any kind of brickwork. I'm only adding some little hints to show that it is a brick house, but they all need to follow the perspective lines as well. And as you get further away and closer to the vanishing point, you need to make those smaller. And that goes for both sides of this building. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how I draw hedges and things like this, but I do use broken lines and I use wobbly lines for the organic shapes, and then straighter, more confident double lines for this, I don't know, is it a gate post? Now I decided to change things up a little bit here and make this look like a corner of a wall or something like that, going back to that vanishing point, and I actually think that worked really well. I did just eyeball that, but that comes with practice. Any of these marks that you put on the floor I call them just flooring marks, they also need to follow the perspective. Otherwise, it will take you out of the illusion. And that's it. We just need to rub out our pencil lines because nobody needs to see all of those X's and guidelines. And that's it. That is how I draw perspective when I don't have a ruler and I just use my fingers because I always have them with me. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more tips and more urban sketching and more art and about. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in next week's video. Bye!